So it is my distinct pleasure now to introduce Dr. David Johnson, the director of the Center for Comparative and International Education and our fearless leader for OXSCIE and for Schools 2030. His remarks will be followed by Minister Souad, the Minister of Education from Sudan. Over to you, David. Thanks. Thank you.
If only I had the energy that Andy displays. So isn't it great, the result of the football last night? We could talk about that. I mean, I think England defeated a fearsome opposition in the likes of Tunisia, and that gives us hope for lesser opposition like Germany and Mexico. So, a very warm welcome to the University of Oxford and to the second symposium for comparative and international education, fondly known as OXSCIE. It's good to see so many familiar faces and so many new. OXSCIE is a forum in which we report on the work of the research program on uncertainty and education that we are carrying out in partnership with the Aga Khan Foundation and the Global Center for Pluralism. It has a simple objective: to gather together people working on and in education to learn about what we believe. Now, to many, that may sound odd or even patronizing, but we know that we live in uncertain times, in dangerous times, where progressive ideas and fearless ideals are threatened by retrogressive politics fueled by fearful minds. Society as we once knew it has changed, for the better and for many, irreversibly so. But change courts uncertainty, and uncertainty is often uncomfortable. And there are those who exploit uncertainty and who thrive on discomfort as an impetus for rowing back to the old certainties and old comforts. It is at this divergence that the role and mission of education is ever under scrutiny. Our research studies the relationship between uncertain society and the framing and reframing of the mission and role of education. Societies everywhere are experiencing a rise of new uncertainties: political, economic, social, cultural, and moral, much of which is triggered by a series of intertwined national and international events, the consequences of which unsettle social and cultural certainties of place and belonging. In Europe, the unprecedented rise of human migration, the consequence of war or flagrant abuses of human rights, has without doubt given rise to new uncertainties and has brought into play starkly contrasting views on what it means to be British or European, on citizenship and identity, on rights and responsibilities. And it is evident that these opposing political narratives impose starkly different perspectives on the what and the why of education, whether it should be employed to drive inexorably towards diversity and pluralism, or used to support a retreat in favor of singularity. To enable us to embrace and work with difference towards something that is unique and new, or to learn to reject change in favor of something familiar and reminiscent of the past. In this, it is increasingly clear that education does not respond only to politics or policies, but also to the heartbeat of society. And so firm in the belief that it is ultimately the weight of public sentiment that drives public policy, we have set out to capture public opinions on change and uncertainty. And I've done some work with a former student last year, a paper which is forthcoming, and we use in this paper the metaphors of remaking and revival, and revulsion and retraction to describe the public sentiment and the thrust of public policy in several European countries. And this, I offer, is a really important way in which to understand education, away from what assessments are appropriate, away from perhaps what kind of curriculum is meaningful, or what efforts we employ in the training of teachers. I urge you to think about society in thinking of education. An Al Jazeera news report aired last August reveals how in a small southern Italian village of Camini, the resettlement of Syrian families contributed to a revival, in our use of the term, of a declining local economy and an enrichment of culture. The village had experienced increasing job opportunities, and schools that would have closed now filled with students. One shopkeeper, Rosaria Zuzzolo, said, "We never thought it would be like a resource for us. We just wanted to receive people who are running away from war and offer them hospitality." The report shows Syrian women learning how to make traditional Italian donuts, and men and women together with local residents refurbishing abandoned houses. And studies on politics and sociology have used such cases to reject the exaggerated and generalized criticisms that those who argue that these minorities necessarily constitute a threat to national cohesiveness, collective identity, or indeed economic prosperity is not all that it seems. But we decided to dig a bit further and studied newspaper clippings, and yes, believe it or not, for those who know me for many years, Twitter feeds and blogs to uncover the depth of public sentiment on this issue. While we found much in the way of positive sentiment, such as thanks Italy for receiving these peace-loving refugees, and these refugees make up the low birth rate of Europe, blessings in disguise, there were also many unflattering remarks, to put it mildly, and I shall return to these in a minute. In Germany and Spain and Portugal too, there's good evidence of policy work and public sentiment that embraces change in favor of remaking and of revival. Remaking is about new vocabularies of identity, wherein a language of integration is spoken. And Germany has mastered this integrative spirit through its people and positive public opinion, at least up to a few months ago. Politically, Angela Merkel's open door policy and mass welcoming of refugees in September 2015, in which Syrian refugees were guaranteed safe passage through the adjournment of the Dublin Protocol, edified the propositions of remaking and revival. And of course, as we know, Angela Merkel achieved a moral victory for Germany as she gained international respect and hoped to encourage other European nations to be as receptive. But it soon became evident that the swelling numbers of refugees was more than what German resources were able to cope with, finances and other resources that the state could bear. And it soon became clear just how divided German society was, and on a larger scale, how divided Europe is on the issue. So as the UN heaped praise on Germany internally, some saw her decision as a mistake, and citizens held mixed sentiments. So the need for remaking and revival is evident in the way Germany and perhaps Sweden justified their refugee intakes in 2015 from an economic as well as a humanitarian perspective. The German Interior Minister, for example, declaring, "We need people, we need young people, we need immigrants." And similarly in Sweden, the Minister of Migration said, "A country with a decreasing population is a stagnating country, which affirms the metaphor, I think, of remaking and revival. But what about revulsion and retraction? Public sentiment is bitterly divided in Italy, in Germany, in Hungary, in Greece, to name but a few countries in our study. And some of the material we've uncovered certainly display very divided and deeply held dispositions towards racism and derision. So what opportunities have they brought with them? The need to feed them? Let's not forget that they are living off social benefits paid for by hard-working Italian taxpayers, and already stated that these funds will run dry, and what will they do when they do? If there's an earthquake in this place tomorrow, they'll all be fleeing again, born cowards, they'll die cowards, and so forth. I won't read the rest of it, but it's in that sort of spirit. The reason for citing this study is obvious. It's obvious to us, and the reason that OXSCIE exists is that it forces us to confront truths and not to be complacent in the naivety that policy or philanthropic work or good-minded efforts are enough to cure what have become increasingly worrying divides in unequal societies. In Africa too, as in Latin America, the Middle East, the question of for whom is education important presents itself in a way that is important to understand. There are, for many, it's a foregone conclusion that their attainment of a secondary school leaving certificate or a university degree is almost a foregone conclusion, and that the transitions between that and employment, for example, almost a guarantee, because of patronage and all sorts of other things that people know a lot about. But there are also those in the urban slums in Pakistan and Nairobi, and those girls in captivity in northern Nigeria, or as the Radio 4 report early this morning, covering girls under the yoke of ISIS who've had to risk life and limb in order to go to school and to study. These are really important factors in our understanding for whom education is important and what do we do about it. So really to conclude, because I think this is a symposium that one hopes will address these issues, the question I'll leave you in conclusion, in conclusion is, if there is an obvious demand for education by children in urban slums, by girls in rural areas or in captivity, by Palestinian students who are uncertain about when the next bomb would hit their schools, is it sufficient, our provision of a literacy curriculum or an education, as it is sometimes called? Is that enough, as it were, to address the deep divisions in society, the deep inequalities in society? And it's worth us pausing to reflect on that question. I would like just to introduce Minister Souad, who actually has stepped down from the Education Ministry in Sudan. And I've worked with Minister Souad over 4 or 5 years in attempting to set up the architecture for a national learning assessment in Sudan. And when the first results of this learning assessment became available, she spearheaded across 18 states, including in East and West Darfur, North Darfur, a campaign to ensure that the results which showed huge disparities in educational outcomes for nomadic students, for refugee populations, of which Sudan takes many, for the poorest, for those in rural areas, spearheaded a fearless campaign to make these results known and to ensure that resources were deployed adequately so that the poorest, the most deprived, the most hard done by have benefited. And I haven't shared with Minister Souad the results of the second learning assessment, which are still sort of coming off the statistical machines, but that effort has made a huge difference to Sudan. Minister Souad.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. It is a pleasure to be with you today. And really, I do appreciate the invitation by His Excellency Mr. David to participate with you. I am Souad from Sudan. I have been a minister for almost 6 years, from 2012 to 2017. And it is the first woman that having this position in Sudan, in the history of Sudan, which is very challenging because the education system in Sudan is very huge. It is almost taking about 7 million children, and normal rate of growth 3%, but actually growing by 7 to 6% because of the IDPs, refugees, returnees, and all these people who are coming to the education system in Sudan. I do one big thing in my period, 6 years. I do reform the curriculum, and I do it by starting to get involved and participation from the child themselves, growing up to the mothers and fathers, to the teachers, to the community, to get their contribution in what they want to teach and taught their children. The process takes almost 2 years until we finish what we call big policy of changing the curriculum in Sudan, and all of us agree to increase the civic education component in our curriculum so that we can get rid of all the problems that we are already in. But the other big thing that I get is to make what we called integrated policy by asking the Ministry of Social Welfare and the Ministry of Health to join us to do a collective work. Since education itself cannot work unless we have some support from others' policies so that education can be a priority. The integrated policy gives us a chance to put more resources and to reach the people who are keen to support education in Sudan. And I do selling and convincing all the people to put children at the priority and their needs, and definitely education is one of them. I end up with a very good policy that convincing the people in conflict area, and we have a very remote area that's suffering from conflict for a long time. But I convince even the military people to give us a chance to put education as a priority and as a soft hat to lead the process of peace. And I succeed in that. We put education and schools at the first target for the insurance policy, health insurance policy, and also for poverty reduction policy, and also for giving some support, aid support. And the school, it is not for education per se itself, but also to help the community all and all. So we lead the peace process in the conflict area by putting education as a priority, and we get support even not just from the government of Sudan, but even from the private sector, who has been very keen that education process can be a starting and a key for the process of peace. The last thing that we're doing a very good integrated education integrated policy and convincing even the donors who have been putting a very good money for us. And Mr. David has been one of the experts that helped me to improve even the quality of education. Now we build a system, and the number of the schools and the children growing, and the number of teachers growing, and even the money for education allocated in the budget, and also from the donors who are not being experiencing any money to be put for education in Sudan, now are very keen to put money for education and to participate from their project in education. I think education, it is something related to the society, and if you listen to the society and try to articulate the needs of the society, you can lead the process of education with the needs of the society and end up with a unique process that can be trusted by all of us. Thank you very much.